College football was one of many sports that John Saunders covered at ESPN. John meant a lot to so many people. He was a husband, a father, and of course, for 3 decades, he was our beloved colleague here at ESPN. In his younger days, John was even a former all-star defenseman in the Canadian junior hockey ranks.
Yeah, he could have still played. He did still play later in life. John Saunders left us 1 year ago today, the all too early age of just 61 years old. But true to one of his prominent roles as host of the Sports Reporters, he leaves behind one last thoughtful, impactful parting shot. Here's his friend and our colleague, Bob Lee.
A year can be a flash, and beyond the calendar, our hearts call us to reflect that our newsroom, our studios, our lives are all a little quieter, missing the joyous sound of John Saunders' hearty laugh and his powerful presence. John left us suddenly, and as the shock and grief have subsided, they're replaced by a new emotion, gratitude. Just before John passed away, he'd finished writing a book, Playing Hurt. This describes his life story with searing, painful honesty. Few of us knew the full dimension of John's challenges, his lifelong battle with depression, numerous concussions, flirting more than once with suicide, an abusive childhood, a distant family life. I use the word gratitude for John offers a cautionary tale to those suffering from depression. Talk to those close to you, seek help, know that there is a way this disease can be treated. This is an important book, the final grace note of John's remarkable life. So as we remember our friend, we also thank him for bravely telling his story and showing again the strength of this man and the depth of his character. Miss you, buddy.
Well, that says it. Everybody around here misses him. We have John Bacon, who co-wrote Playing Hurt, My Journey from Despair to Hope, with John Saunders. And I said this to you off the air, and I want to say it and make sure people hear it. It's weird to say that you enjoy something like that. I enjoyed this. I did enjoy this. I enjoyed it not only because it was a chance to hear John again, but because it told his story so well. So I would assume as an author, you want people to say, hey, I really like what you did, even though the subject matter is so deep and so heavy.
It does sound weird to say that, but it's true. The idea was it's a book about depression, but it's not depressing to read it. Right. John's humor is there about every 10 or 15 pages over the worst stuff. And when John and I were working on this for 4 years, we'd sit down and about every 15 or 20 minutes, he'd get the big belly laugh, which you know well.
Oh, yeah.
Going, and his sense of humor never left him. He was a very resilient guy. Yeah. And I like to think that depression itself did not define his whole person.
John, how did you two come together and begin this whole process for this book?
I would have to say dumb luck. I was a high school hockey player of mediocre ability, which makes you a sports writer eventually. I was getting dressed for a celebrity hockey game in Detroit with John, and to my left were the Hanson brothers, and you're not talking to them. They're putting the foil on at that point,
yeah,
so, of course. So John and I hit it off, and we kept talking for almost 20 years. We're doing a book together, we thought, on Madison Square Garden when John had the accident, here at ESPN, where he got up too fast, fell backwards. Very bad concussion, which put him in Mount Sinai for 6 weeks. So he had to relearn how to walk and talk and read and write. And this is a very smart guy who was struggling to put 10 pegs into 10 holes all of a sudden. It took him 6 minutes. And John and I were talking throughout this process, and it was often emotional. But John said, I want to write about this. And I said, are you sure? There's a lot there. And we checked it out with his doctors, and they said, this is a good idea. And we kept on checking in throughout. But John approached me, and it had to be that way. You can't ask a man to fork over that much.
No, and when you outlined the struggles that he had mentally, physically, verbally, for a guy who embodied the very best of those traits, I mean, he was so... Is vulnerable the right word to use in his dealings with you?
I think so. He laid himself bare, and he pulls no punches. There's nothing cute. He's not asking for sympathy or pity, but he just lays it all right out there as a pretty matter-of-fact way. But he was in touch with his emotions, I would say. Yeah. Not here at ESPN. That was a different job. But with his close friends outside, often ESPN people, John could really let it out.
Were you surprised with how much he let us into even his childhood and what he suffered there?
Almost every story surprised me because for the first 15 years I knew John, I knew almost none of this. I knew a bit of it, but not much. And then, like you guys, you read the book, you kind of go, holy smokes, holy smokes, holy smokes. Yeah. Any of this would have knocked down a lesser man. I mean, it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, self-medication, self-mutilation, concussions, depression, and none of it defeated John. And the heartbreaking part for me is the last 5 years got better and better and better. He's having a great time with his brother Bernie, his wife and daughters, traveling around, friends here. And then he died of natural causes a year ago. And I'm sure that threw you guys as well.
61 is it's too damn young. I mean, that's for...
When you're 53, it really is.
It is. I mean, it is.
But John said the same thing. And John, again, the best years were in front of him. That was the horrible part.
That is just it. Somebody who continued to grow into how comfortable he was with himself and the man that he'd become and the father that he'd become. And I want to ask you about his road to fatherhood, because to call it unconventional might be an understatement. What sense did you get from him in maybe his own validation and his own confidence in being a father to two successful, well-rounded young women?
Great question. That was everything to him. Wanda, of course, love of his life, 30-year marriage, very strong. But his dad probably did more, of all things I just listed, his dad probably did more damage to John than anybody else, which often led to the other things. He was so terrified of repeating his father's mistakes that when he married Wanda, he said, we're not having kids, and for that reason. And he felt better in his own skin and then better with her. They finally said, let's do it. Yeah. And they did it not once but twice. And they call him Daddy to this day, and it still melted him to the day he died. And that was his life. He did not repeat his father's mistakes.
No.
John, what did he hope people would get out of this book when they would read it? Because it takes a lot to, like, be the person to be saying, hey, you're not alone.
It does, and Joe Biden, the old vice president, said to John, you can come out as a gay athlete in the NFL, you can come out as a gay athlete in the NBA. No one's ever come out with these 5 things while playing. It's still stigmatized. John wanted people with all these 5 things to not feel stigmatized and to know that it is a disease and you can get help and the treatments usually work. So military guys, athletes, men especially, have a hard time asking for help.
And to not be afraid to stick up for to be your own advocate for your own care. You mentioned one of the doctors, Dr. Dangerous is how he's referred to in the book. And John flat out didn't understand and didn't agree with the treatment he was getting. But because it's a doctor, you think, all right, I'm gonna go along with exactly what they say. I want to get into his role here at ESPN. That's how we knew him.
Of course.
And when you start as a new anchor here, when you started when John was here, you were paired up with John. Through the folks here at the talent office said, we want you to meet with John. And you say, okay, that's all well and good. Does John want to meet with me? 30-year-old, never met him, coming from a place he never worked.
Right.
And he did. He took that time, he took that pride, and he followed up with you. Even if you were too reticent to follow up with him via text or via email, which he gave to you readily. I'm just curious what sense you got from him in his responsibility for future generations of people to whom he wasn't related. Obviously, he cared about his nieces and nephews, but for the younger folks in this business, all races, he stuck his neck out for them and he mentored them.
For me, that means a lot, obviously. You've gone through this whole process. I think that was in some ways a warm-up role for this book, that John, it made him feel much better to help somebody else. And if you're having a problem yourself, usually few things make you feel better than helping somebody else get through their stuff. And this is, I learned from John, just how complicated this job is with 3 guys in your head at once. Yeah. Of course, we talk about that in the book. That he found very gratifying. Very often I'd call him here at SportsCenter, and he's talking to one of you guys. So that was very typical.
You know what was the toughest part, like coming to the end of the book and realizing that there's not going to be another follow-up and wishing he was here to tell that?
Yeah, there was so much more to his story.
This should have been his victory lap, not mine, obviously.
But thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
And again, it's weird to say that you enjoy reading this, but you do enjoy reading this. The book is available everywhere as of Tuesday, online, in bookstores. Playing Hurt, My Journey from Despair to Hope. John Bacon, we appreciate the time, sir. Thank you again.
Little